Thank you very much, Jodie, for organising. So I'm Denise Turner. I run the Insight programme at Newsworks. Some of you might have seen me present before. I've been at Newsworks for about 3 years. Before that, I spent 20 odd years in the agency. So I hopefully bring that experience to what I'm doing. So one of the big things that we are keen on is effectiveness. And that runs through everything we do, whether that be what money comes back when you invest some money in advertising, or whether that be advertising in a quality environment and the value trusted environment that news brands bring, or whether that be the influence that news brands have on people's perceptions and purchases. So this planning for profit is very firmly in the return on investment category. We first started off doing a very Ronseal named study called the ROI study a couple of years ago. And that was really looking at the revenue that comes from when you advertise. And it was, at that stage, it was very much print-based, because one of the problems, and I'll come on to talk about this a little bit, is that digital is this amorphous mass, and people don't separate it out into its component parts. So they don't, you know, when they talk about just this digital display, amorphous mass, or digital video. So I was really keen that actually what we did was we separated that out. So Bench Marketing, who conducted the study for us, they're part of Omnicom Media Group, and but Sally, who runs it, has been doing econometrics longer than most of us have been alive, and she really knows what she's talking about. So I went to her with a brief and said, we want to do something new, and we want to update the study, but we don't want it just to be an update. We want it to be something new and different and some exciting, groundbreaking stuff to talk about. So hence Planning for Profit was born. Now, one of the things there'll be a few of you in here who have read Pride and Prejudice, I should imagine. So truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a fortune must be in want of a wife, is the opening line of Pride and Prejudice. So I've sort of taken liberties with it. Apologies to Jane Austen. So truth universally acknowledged that brand investing money in advertising must be in want of a return. Now, it would seem with the advent of digital that actually that link, proving that link between investment and return, is so much easier than ever it was, because you advertise and something happens, right? No, wrong, because it doesn't quite work that simply, because you think about the last purchase that you made. Did you just do it on one advertising exposure? No, there would have been lots of different things that you saw in the lead up to it. Now, I had a very unfortunate incident a week and a half ago when my washing machine broke on a Saturday night. I have 2 children, teenage boy and an almost teenage girl, and a husband, and it was like, what on earth am I going to do? Within half an hour, I had bought a washing machine online for delivery within 2 days, but that wasn't the first time I'd sort of made brand associations about washing machines. I'd absorbed associations, I'd seen ads over a length of time, and it's the first time in probably about 6 or 7 years I've bought a washing machine, so it's not something I'm going to buy every day. So I'm not just going to see an ad and go, oh, I'm going to buy a washing machine today. Doesn't work like that. The purchase journey is much more complex, and I often talk about it like a pinball machine, that if you sort of get thrown into the purchase journey, and if you're lucky, you'll come out having bought something at the other end. So my purchase journey was very short, but my journey to that the actual physical act of purchasing was very short, but my journey to that purchase was very long.
What brand did you go with?
I went with a Hotpoint. So I had a Hotpoint before, but I did look at Samsung, Zanussi, and the Samsung and Zanussi were the other 2. So I had a short list of brands in my head that I looked at. So it's just to sort of illustrate the fact that actually, people don't just see an ad and then they do something. And particularly like car buying. Who buys a car? Oh, I've seen, I must buy a car today. Doesn't work like that. Yet we've had, I've heard an example of an agency goes, well, people aren't just responding to the ad within 2 days of seeing a car ad. Well, it doesn't work like that. So I think digital is great, but it's made people have sort of the wrong kind of focus. There's an unhealthy focus on the short term, and I don't mean even like 3 to 6 months in short term, I mean days or hours, in terms of I must get a response now. And not every category is like that. I think it's also the volume of available data. So people are bombarded by loads of different metrics that they don't know which are the important ones that I should be focusing on. And I think digital has sort of turned back the measurement clock, because there's this illusion of precision that digital will give you absolutely everything. And it's brilliant, and it makes our lives a lot easier. I could buy my washing machine in half an hour. I mean, it took me actually less than half an hour. It was the consideration discussing with my husband which one we were going to buy. But the other thing is, I think it's sort of led to that, if a channel can't deliver a what happened immediately next result, then it's seen as being ineffective, and that's not the case, and we all know that, but we need to be standing up and talking about that. So in planning for profit, I was really keen that we looked at news brands in their totality, and we looked at what they offered to overall campaign effectiveness, and particularly with the print element, the digital element as well, but the print element, go, this is really important in driving overall campaign effectiveness. So there are 3 things about this study that I think are pretty good things, and I wouldn't say quite unique, but I'm quite excited about them. First is the effectiveness of both print and digital news brands. When people build effectiveness or econometric models, they do not generally separate out digital news brand from this amorphous mass of online display. So how can you, when readership is so prevalent on mobile devices, on desktop, how can you, and there's so much more growth in readership on digital devices, how can you, if you can't prove the impact, how can you have the evidence to go and prove that they have an impact? So it was really important to me to be able to do this, and we are able to do this for the very first time in this study, which I'm very excited about. Second thing is a focus on profit. Not necessarily new, because ThinkBox did a study towards the end of last year where they talked about profit. But their study, a couple of things that are different about theirs. One, print was newspapers and magazines combined, so we couldn't separate out newspapers, and they fell into that trap of the amorphous mass of digital display as one, and it didn't prove very effective at all compared to proven media, or as I now like to call it after Media 360, grown-up media. We are grown-up media. I like that. The third thing is it has the widest market coverage of any study. Now, one of the issues with this type of analysis, where we're taking lots of different econometric models and putting them together and looking at the aggregated results, is that you need to have enough cases in each category to be able to separate out, to be able to report on the results. And you end up with the usual suspects. I mean, important categories for us: retail, finance, motors. What if you've got an energy and utilities client? What if you've got an entertainment client? Or what if you're the National Lottery? How do you prove that those cases are effective? Because you need to have enough to work out what the learnings from those cases are. So I'll come on to explain how benchmarking have done this, but for the first time we can look at 86% of UK categories and 90% plus of advertised brands. The difference between the two numbers is that some categories, such as pharmaceuticals, some subcategories of that don't advertise above the line for legislative reasons. But for the vast majority of brands that you are talking to, you should be able to have a learning from this that you can take to them, rather than having to approximate an overall learning, etc. So I think that's a huge USP for this study for the very first time. So I'm going to try and keep the methodology relatively straightforward. So, but just kind of wave your hand at me if I'm losing you, because I think it's important that we understand some of the inputs so that when I come to show you the results, it all makes complete sense. So one of the problems with looking at, because one of the things that Econometrics does is looks at the impact of all of the different influences on sales, one of which being advertising spend. And if you can't measure advertising spend clearly enough, or accurately enough, then you're missing a trick. So we know Nielsen, it's got its foibles. It's not perfect, but hopefully it's equally imperfect across everything. But it's very good at offline, good in inverted commas, but it's reasonable at offline. It's been doing it for donkey's years. But what about digital? It's pretty rubbish at digital display, and it doesn't do search. So that was one of the biggest things, because that doesn't give you a proper representation of the media mix of all the categories that are spending. So benchmarking introduced us to a thing called Standard Media Index. So 65% of all booking data, it's actually goes into Standard Media Index. So actual booking data. The exception, and it's a big exception, I will admit, is WPP. But one of our other publishers, as part of the Newsworks group, did a bit of analysis, who had access to SMI, and they did a bit of analysis, and they looked and they saw, somebody trying to join in, hello? They looked and they saw that actually WPP's pattern of spend across media channels was very similar to the 65%. Is there something I should be doing? No? No? Jodie? Help? No? Is it all right? We'll just carry on and ignore it. Yeah.
New technology.
This is amazing, this new floor. It's great, isn't it? Alexa's listening. I have a daughter called Lexi. She doesn't like her Alexa being called Alexa. So she has to call it Echo. Oh, that looks good. That looks much better. So anyway, back to SMI. So actually, when I was most latterly at Havas, and I discovered that actually we'd been providing data via our finance department to SMI for 2 years before I realised. I had no idea. But the great thing about it is that if you're an agency and you provide the data, so you have EDF as a client, you see what EDF's spend is across all media channels, and then you can see the categories, so you can see how you compare. For us as a media owner, we can see the pattern of spend across different categories, so we don't see individual advertiser results. But what it does, it gives you that detailed breakdown of digital spend across, importantly, display, video, and paid search. So you get a proper pattern of where spend is moving. And importantly, it gives the breakdown of spend across print and digital news brands. So what we do is a really natty thing that benchmarking taught us. And we combine offline media spend from Nielsen with what the SMI says the digital percentage is, and this allows us to do it by category and by advertiser, and then we can work out what the pattern of spend for every advertiser is using Nielsen and SMI. And what we've done is we've done that for the top 100 advertisers, so it's something we can send to you, and particularly looking at their patterns of investment in news brands compared to other media over the last few years, and we can work out whether they're under-investing or whether they're over-investing. Very few are doing over-investing, almost none, you'll be pleased to know. But they all need to shift their spend up a bit. So that's the way that we get the spend stuff in, which is actually really important. The other input is obviously econometrics. So econometrics is it's really a way of disentangling all the effects of things that affect sales. Some of you will know that. Whether that be distribution, whether it's weather, whether it's seasonality. What you don't want to be doing is overestimating the effect of advertising and claiming sales that are really due to something else. Distribution, for instance, if you can't buy a product, how can advertising affect a sale? It's not possible. So I used to run an econometrics team at Havas, and one of the clients we worked on was Magners when they launched with Over Ice. And we knew if the temperature went up a degree, what the impact on sales would be. We knew when they launched Magners Pear what distribution had to hit before advertising was justified. So that's the base that goes into it. And what we've got in the study is a meta-analysis of 684 of those econometric models, so a lot. Benchmarking have been doing this for a very long time. I mean, I often say the year dot is not quite that long far ago, but probably since about 2000, and they've got hundreds and thousands of econometric models. What I wanted to do was make sure, when I briefed them, I said we need to have enough to make the analysis robust, but not go so far back that we're living in a different age. So 2011 to 2017 is the range that we look at. And meta-analysis it's very commonly used in like drugs tests. If you give a drug to one person and they have an odd reaction, is that replicable across 684 people? You don't know. So actually this is what meta-analysis is. It's about standardizing all the inputs and all the outputs and looking at the differences in the patterns. So one of the inputs, so there's a random equals sign there. One of the key measures that we look at is profit return on investment. And that is sales revenue multiplied by profit margin divided by investment. It's probably easiest if I show you. So if sales revenue minus cost of goods, etc., is £100,000. Our profit margin is £10,000. So in theory, that's £10,000 profit. But if we divide that by the media investment of £5,000, then we get a PROI of 2. So the multiplier effect. of 2. The profit ROI is 2. So when I come on to describe, if I talk about PROI, it's that profit return on investment, and we convert that into pounds as well in terms of, because one of the headlines of the study that some of you will have seen is that we're missing £3 billion worth of profit by underinvesting in news brands. You'll see a lot of this type of chart, okay? Sorry to bang on about methodology, but what we do is for every category, what benchmarking have done is divided the category into 3, because if you have 90 cases in a category, looking at each of those 90 individually is quite hard to discern any patterns. So what benchmarking do, and this is we use this in the ROI study as well, is they divide each of the categories into 3 equal groups of cases. So if you've got 90 in a category, the lowest third, the middle third, the highest third. So they divide them into 3 equal groups in terms of, so then you get percentage of spend, investment in print or digital news brands along the bottom, and you get the PROI then for each of the thirds that comes across the top. So you can see where, and what you'll see when I present it is that there are current levels of spend and then where people should be in terms of moving their investment in news brands. And those tertiles will be the percentage of spend by tertile will be different by category, because different categories have different levels of spend and investment in news brands. So the super category is the thing I'm very excited about, as well as everything else about it. But super categories, so what benchmarking have done, they created a 5-sector segmentation out of the 30 categories. So those 30 categories covering 86% of UK categories. Oh, it's the doors. I was wondering what it was. Now, what they've done is they haven't just randomly created these 5 segments. They've looked at consumer behaviour in the segments. What's the level of brand consideration? What's the purchase cycle? How do people respond to advertising? And then they've also looked at how those categories respond to advertising investment. Is it a quick effect? Do people advertise and then there is a quick effect, which there is in some categories, or is it a longer carryover effect from advertising? So those statistics have all been put together to create these 5 segments, which I'll introduce to you now. So everyday pickups, which are exactly what you think they would be. So the chocolate bars or bags of crisps, or could be loo paper actually as well. But you know, I often use the example of if I'm going into a shop and I want to buy a bar of chocolate, I don't spend ages agonizing. Some people might, but I don't spend ages agonizing. Is it a Kit Kat or a Twirl? Or possibly a Twix, because that's also my consideration list. But I've built up that consideration list over time, but my purchase decision is very quick. So everyday pickups is a very quick FMCG type, cheap and cheerful FMCG type product. It could also be loo paper, as I said. You know, some people agonize over, is it quilted, is it Andrex, what are they, Kleenex or whatever it is. But generally, they are everyday purchases. Refresh and revive are things that perk us up for the day, that help us relax. Could be your coffee that you buy from Costa in the morning, could be McDonald's, you know, could be a fast food restaurant, those types, little bit more. I think the original name for them was fulfilling FMCGs. I think refresh and revive is a bit more descriptive of how consumers might behave in the category. Leisure and pleasure, things that mostly give us enjoyment in life. I say mostly because if you don't like supermarket shopping, that's not leisure and pleasure, is it? But it's also things like buying a national lottery ticket, hope for the future. It's gambling, or it's entertainment, going to the cinema. That sort of thing falls into leisure and pleasure. Shiny new things is gadgets, telecoms, Xbox, those sort of things that we like to have, that are a treat to ourselves, if you like, a little bit higher ticket purchase. And then grown up stuff you need to live an adult life. So things like energy and utilities, or breakdown cover. It also includes tickets for trains and planes that you might need to get somewhere. We do have enough cases for 4 of the individual categories, so we've got those separated out. So supermarkets, retail, which is everything that's retail, bar supermarkets, motors and finance. So when you're looking at the results, it's worth, if you're going to the individual, if you've got a brand in one of these categories, go to the individual category results, because they'll be more focused. But if you've got a brand that appears not in one of those, then it'll go to the appropriate one, and I'll explain to you how you do that, because there's a lot of stuff in this. So I'm going to show you 1 super category and 2 categories. Once I've done one, you'll get the idea. So hopefully it's relatively straightforward. So grown-up stuff, the fundamentals and necessities you'd associate with grown-up life. Tickets for trains, balloons, as I said, utility providers, and breakdown recovery or online delivery. So, I mean, the great thing about this is that this incorporates a lot of things that wouldn't be able to be separated out before an analysis. So it hopefully gives access to a lot more applicable learnings. There's a pattern of these charts. I first show the level of spend in print and digital news brands, then what the tertiles, those thirds, look like for print and digital, and then what the recommended level of spend is. So this is suffered quite a lot, the grown-up stuff category, particularly print. So yellow is print news brands and grey is digital. Digital hasn't suffered quite so much. But definitely, when we launched the ROI study, we talked about a pendulum swinging too far the wrong way. It's definitely swung too far the wrong way in this category. And, you know, it's begun to, the drop has begun to stabilise a little bit, but not as much as it should have done. On the website, we've got category decks, and we do show where the other channels are in terms of the patterns of spend. So you've got all of that. It's just quite a lot of numbers to try and present, but you can see in.
So is that tracked against? So obviously that's print news brands and digital news brands. The category's seen a decline you know, over the last 5 years. There, have they gone elsewhere to sort of TV, radio?
Yes, so I haven't got it here, but I have got it. It is in the category decks that we've got on the website, so you can see where those categories have gone.
Is it that as a category that they've declined overall, or has that money been shifted elsewhere to different mediums?
So this is coming from SMI, so this is a percentage of spend. So there may be a decline in some categories. Because when we do that SMI and Nielsen analysis, we look at it on a brand level. We haven't looked at categories over time, but we could do that, couldn't we? But this looks, in some categories, money has gone to other traditional channels, but mostly it's gone to digital. Is the pattern of spend. So, I don't know if you got some copies of the book, Jodie. We'll send you some copies of the book as well. We've written it all up into a proper report, but all of the category decks with notes are available on the website, so you can see where the money's gone and to and from.
And of the top 100 clients that you said that you've got as well, have you got that in terms of to be able to share that?
Yeah, yes.
And also, does that have the data of where that revenue has gone?
That has the data of their level of investment in news brands. It doesn't have over time, it doesn't have the detail of where the investment has gone. But that's something, if there are particular clients you're interested in, we could have a look at for you. Yeah. So, I mean, what we'll do is we'll follow up with stuff, and then always just ask us any questions as you're working through it, or you're thinking, I don't know what the hell she was talking about, then just ask, because it's a lot. I appreciate it's quite a lot of numbers and data to take in over time. So, remember our tertiles, so we divide this category into 3. So the lowest tertile is 0.3 to 6.2, medium is 6.2 to 17.8, and then 17.8 to 48. Current print news brands' current share budget is 5.2%, so at the top end of the lower tertile, paying back £1.04. But they could, if they moved into this tertile, there could be a significant.
Is that for every pound spent?
For every pound spent. Yeah. So they could be getting quite a bit more bang for their buck, as it were, if they moved into that middle tertile. I mean, technically they could get the most if they moved into the upper tertile, but you imagine trying to persuade a client, an advertiser, that really you've been spending 5%, you've been spending 48%, they'd laugh you out of court, wouldn't they? So, but sort of that's why I've colour coded them slightly differently on this one, because actually if you get them here, you're doing pretty well, aren't you? So. Great things we can do with print is we can look at the recommended spend by budget levels. So that's 6.2 to 17.8 is quite a big range, but what happens at different budget levels. And what Benchmarking have done with all of their results for is they've created a sort of an optimizer tool for all channels. So they put in their budget, and then it tells them what the optimum level of media mix is by all channels at different budget levels. And obviously we don't have access to that, but we do have access to the print version of it, the print element of it rather. So that's 6.2 to 17.8. Actually, it should be somewhere between 7 and 10, depending on your budget level. And it's relatively consistent for this category. For digital, there's not enough data over time, so we have to go at a standard kind of rate for digital. But digital's pretty profitable. Digital news brands are pretty profitable. So currently, they're currently in the lowest tertile at 0.1 to 2.5%, at 2%. But what we've done in all of these digital charts is compared digital news brands' share of budget with digital display overall. It's massive difference, isn't it? 2% versus 30%. But moving up into the middle tertile would definitely give more profit. So the recommended spend share of budget is 4%. So doubling. But doubling from 2 to 4 is not that much, I would say.
That's interesting that it drops on the 5.
Yeah, diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Overspend. And I think with all of the digital stuff at the moment, I would say that current levels of investment in digital news brands are relatively modest compared to some other channels and compared to the print element. And models can only stretch so far as the data that goes into them. So I think if there's bigger opportunity in digital, if there was more evidence, the cases don't support a higher level of spend yet, but they may do when time goes on. So that's growing up stuff. Supermarkets, same pattern. So actually when we launched the ROI study a couple of years ago, was when Tesco had just come out of print. There's that big thing. And it's nice to see actually things have stabilised, and Tesco doubled their spend in print last year. And in fact, Tesco emailed us the day after the launch and said, would you come in and present it to us? So we're going next Wednesday to see the client. Sorry? We're seeing the whole of the marketing team. So, yeah, that's next week's job. Next week's presentation. What's good, it is sort of beginning to stabilise over time. It's dropped a bit in 2017, but definitely things are stabilising. We've done, actually what we have for the supermarkets category, done an analysis of all of the brands, the main brands in the supermarket category. And of them all, 2 or 3 are about right. So Co-op Bank is about right, Lidl is about right, Tesco is now about right in terms of their level of spend, but all of the others need to be spending a bit more. So we can send you that as well, so that you've got that, because we've done that analysis. I think it feels like a bit of a flagship category for this sort of analysis, because there's lots, they're sort of around and about all the time, aren't they? And it's pretty profitable to be spending in news brands. So in print, current share is 15.6, which is in the lowest tertile, but if they went into that middle tertile, so a minimum of 19.4, they could be seeing quite a lot more profit, return on investment. And then it's still better to be in high than in low, but this is where this sweet spot of investment is, somewhere between 19 and 31%. And if we look at that at a budget level, actually it's, at the sort of, average spenders in the category are spending around the 40 to 50 million, so they should be somewhere around the 23, 27%. The higher spenders are spending the 100 millions, 18, 70%. So there's still room for more investment if they're underspending in the average. Obviously the average doesn't, that's why we'll send you the brand stuff. And then a digital level, it's quite a low category for digital in this analysis, currently at 0.7%, so still pretty profitable for pound spent, but could be getting quite a lot more, even if they, if they increased a bit. So if they went from 0.7 to 2.1 is what the analysis would suggest. And finance, third category. So finance has suffered a lot, actually, when you think about, you look at the print element from 19% in 2013 to 7.2% in 2017, although it has stabilised in the last year. Digital has been actually relatively stable, a bit of a drop in 2015, but growing back up. And I think that makes sense because you think about how you transact online, and you live, you do a lot of your financial transactions online, so that makes sense to me that would be a pretty good figure. When we look at print, currently at the top end of the lower tertile, but not paying back properly, 52p for every pound spent. If they nudged up into this middle tertile, they could almost triple their PROI. And if we look at that then by actually what I should say is that in finance there are 2 different types of response to advertising. There's banking, savings and investments, and then there's cards and loans, and they respond quite differently to advertising. So so banking, savings and investments, at lower levels of spend, they should be spending quite considerable amounts of money, 45% of the budget. Even at higher levels, 10% of the budget, 50 million, 5 million, that's quite a lot of money. So there's definitely room for improvement. Cards and loans is at much lower but still, you know, looking at somewhere between 6 and 12% depending on the level of investment. And then if we look at digital, now this is what I like about these charts is they don't all go in a perfect line, which makes me trust the data more. So currently in the middle, 0.2 to 4.1, just at the top end of it, but if they nudged into this bit, they could see significant improvements. So the recommended share of budget for digital and news brands is 5.6%. So how, I've shown you lots of numbers and you're never going to remember them all. How can you access this? Obviously, Julie's talked about some charts for your decks. If you want to just go and, what we've done is we've made sure the data doesn't just live in PowerPoint. We've created a tool called the PROI Optimizer, which is available on our website. So you can go in and select a brand. So we've done energy and utilities here. You select your budget, annual campaign budget for the brand. So we've said 35 million, you press calculate, it's as simple as that, and then it tells you which category, which super category that subcategory is in, tells you what the minimum proportion of budget to spend in news brands is, and then tells you how you should allocate that between print and digital according to the data. So that's easily accessible on the website, and you just go and play around, and then that gives you the stuff that's in the PowerPoint deck. It's going to go through it all again. But yeah, so that hopefully that just gives an easy way to access the key numbers from it. So the final bit I'm going to do is the profit gap and how we got to the 3 billion. It's always useful to have a headline, isn't it, when you launch a research project? So what I'm going to do is show you how we worked it out for the finance category and then build it up for the super categories. So looked at current finance category spend, and that's based on the SMI and Nielsen combination we talked about earlier. Looked at current investment in print and digital news brands, what that is, and the associated profit. Then what the recommended average investment in print and digital is. Obviously this is an average level and not by budget level, because you'd get your knickers in a twist if you did that. And then potential campaign profit associated with that. And then you take the current profit away from the potential profit to get your missing profit, and you get your total. So obviously, because those individual categories are included in the super categories, what I'm going to do is just build it up from a super category level. Everyday pickups. It's interesting, everyday pickups and refresh and revive don't pay back in the short term. So you will see, even when they improve, it's kind of 41, 51p in the pound or whatever. Now, P&G and Unilever and such like don't advertise just for the sake of it. They know that they will get a return in the longer term, and there's longer term multiplier effects. There's also impact on brand health, etc., and also distribution driving advertising as well. So there's a small measure of 15.8 million. I'd like 15.8 million, wouldn't you? Refresh and Revive, 27 million. Then we get to the biggies. Leisure and Pleasures of 1.24 billion pounds worth of missing profit that's there to be had if people just nudge their investment up in news brands a bit. Shiny New Things. Obviously, higher ticket items, higher purchase costs, 1.4 billion pounds worth of missing profit. And then grown-up stuff, 318 million. So that gives you a total of 3 billion pounds worth of missing profit. It's worth saying that from that, it's driven mostly by print, but there's 300 billion of that missing profit that's due to underinvestment in digital, and goes back to that point that I said about the fact that models can only stretch so far as the current input of data. So I would expect if we did this, hopefully, if people started investing properly, and we did this in 2 or 3 years' time, we'd see that, we'd see that missing profit reduce, but we see greater investment in digital.